Welcome back to the Wingspan Podcast, Episode 6. I'm Doug Barrett, joined by my co-host Chris Mahalan of Nets Daily and our special guest. Our guest is one of the most well-known writers for his dedication to the craft. Michael Scotto is an NBA writer for Bleacher Report and the Associated Press.
Welcome to the Wingspan Podcast, Mike. Thank you for taking some time out of your night to join Doug and I. How are you doing?
Oh, my pleasure, fellas. Anytime. Doing well.
It's great to hear it. So can you talk about your journey to where you got to where you are today, what college you went to, and your first media position or internship?
Oh, sure. Well, I went to Hofstra University on Long Island, and my first internship was at a company called Joseph Marks Sports Incorporated. They did a lot of video editing for the Nets magazine and Yankees magazine TV shows you see on Yes Network. So that was my first internship, and I started working out of there, out of college, making some money on the side during the day while I made my way through the NBA in terms of covering it for different sites and whatnot as I got out of college. And I think that's one of the things that most people don't know is when you first start out, you probably are working either some type of either a day job or whatnot to give yourself some more income while you chase your dream. And, every year I felt like I was able to develop more contacts and try to go to as many games as I can, whether they were at Madison Square Garden or Barclays Center, develop some relationships over the years, stay in touch with those people. And, then as I got older, I got to go to more events like the Chicago Pre-Draft Combine, back in the day when it was the Orlando Summer League and Vegas Summer League, now it's just Vegas Summer League, and really just taking it from there. And, from every outlet that I went to, trying to get better at my craft, get better as a writer, and get better in terms of talking with people and building those relationships. And, over the years, getting some on-camera opportunities and whatnot, and just taking every one and doing the best you can.
That's great. And then, Mike, I got to ask you about so who were some of your mentors growing up when you were in college in the early stages of your career, and kind of how did they impact you in kind of your work down the line? Do you still keep in touch with some of them today?
Yeah, when I was growing up, two people that come to mind. I used to like watching Bob Costas and Gus Johnson, who I would go visit after some Knicks games and check in with him and get his advice. And, when I was younger and in college at Hofstra, he gave me his email and we went back and forth on some things. He gave me some good advice. And I've seen him in the arenas since when he was with the Milwaukee Bucks as one of their play-by-play guys. We got together to catch up and whatnot. That was really fun for me to catch up with those guys. And, I remember going to games when I was in college, and I would see the Frank Isolas of the world. At the time, Chris Sheridan was working for ESPN, and they were all sitting behind the backboard, right behind the basket near the bench. And I would chat them up and get some advice. Just stuff that I use to help get me where I am. And, to see a lot of those guys now and to have worked with some of them has been a lot of fun. It's, if I could have mapped out my 20s, I certainly think I fulfilled the loftiest of expectations that I had.
That's great. And then I just want to backtrack a little bit and ask the question kind of, when did you realize you wanted to pursue a career in sports in general?
I always played basketball growing up. I played in the Hofstra rec leagues in the gym, and we won a couple 3-on-3 tournaments and whatnot. I went to school with Charles Jenkins, who was an NBA prospect. I always wanted to be close to the game somehow. At that time, I knew I wasn't going to the NBA. I will not rule out a Long Island Nets tryout, though. I want to make that clear. Now that it's open tryouts and whatnot, I have been recovering from a fractured elbow, but I do plan to do that at some point, just for fun. But as far as the league, I always wanted to be around it. I always loved basketball, and I just wanted to be as close to it as I can. And it felt like talking to the players, interviewing them was a good way to do so.
And since you're chatting up a little bit of a potential for the game, I got to ask you kind of what were your numbers and your averages back then when you did play in the rec league, and kind of what you got to your game.
Was a pick and roll point guard. I'd have to look back at the stats. They were in a rec league, but we did win 2 3-on-3 titles. I still have the shirts and the clothes and the pictures from it. It was a lot of fun. I would say definitely a better shooter now than when I was younger. But it was just the camaraderie with the guys, and you see that even now at the NBA. I don't think you can cover the NBA effectively if you don't know what's going on, if you never played the game before. So
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then if I had to say, if you had to name your kind of NBA comparison player, who would it be? Kind of that play style and the guy that you looked up in your childhood.
Sometimes it's funny. Sometimes I've gotten 2 very different comparisons. Sometimes I've gotten Pablo Prigioni, but the one I like better is more when I play a little loose, Jason Williams, White Chocolate. I used to love like his crazy passes behind the back. I tried a few. I tried a few of those.
You're saying you got some highlight clips on YouTube you got to show us, right?
There's definitely some videos I have saved and whatnot. But it's a different game for me now. Now I'm 30. When I was 18, I had one dunk in my life. That was it. I have not been able to get up that high since. Now I can touch the rim.
KD Pinson, thumbs down of approval? would you say you would have gotten one of those, or is it like a clean flush?
It was a tip. It bounced off the front of the rim, and as it was coming down, my hand at the time, I just got over the rim, and I pushed it through, and I grabbed it very quickly, and the gym exploded. It was fun because none of us knew like I had it in me, but when you're in the middle of the game and you got some adrenaline, it's a little easier when you don't have a suit on, like you guys see me at the arena.
That's true, man. So now, what player do you see yourself as? Since before you're more, passing, prototypical point guard. Now that you're a shooter, who's the kind of guy that you're looking at right now? That comparison.
I'm still going with Jason Williams because when I play in the park, I like to put on a show. Like that fun.
Okay. Invite us out sometime, man.
Showman.
Cool. So, since we kind of mentioned it a little bit, when did you begin watching the NBA? Some of your first memories of the NBA, your favorite team growing up, and was covering the NBA always a dream and focus of yours? Because obviously you mentioned you wanted to pursue it, but deep dive into it a little bit more.
Yeah, I grew up. My aunt's company had season tickets to the Knicks games, so we used to go. Back in those days, they were in section 400 and something. They don't even have that now. So we would go to those games, and I grew up watching Patrick Ewing. That was probably my favorite player. I just loved the way he played basketball, and it's been cool in the years since to see him and meet him and have a chat with him and whatnot when he was coaching in the league. And then I guess when I thought of it as a possible career, I took some high school journalism classes for electives at the end of my senior year. And when I went to Hofstra, I decided I was going to be a broadcast journalism major and a speech communications dual major. And, I went through those classes, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed talking to people. I enjoy talking to people in general, but like doing the interviews and whatnot. It was just fun. And that's when I thought, I might as well try and pursue this and see where we can go.
Okay. So, what were some of your favorite seasons growing up while you're still a fan before you became more of an impartial, writer with no media bias per se?
I would say the year the Knicks went to the finals was obviously cool. And then by the time, the Nets moved to Brooklyn, as a writer, I thought when the Nets first moved into Brooklyn, I thought that was such an exciting time because as someone who was born in Brooklyn and lived here, my whole life, I never thought that the Nets or that Brooklyn would have an NBA team. So that was a really cool experience to have been there from day one. It's still something I don't take for granted because, Barclays Center and Atlantic Avenue did not look like that many years ago. And then, Mikhail Prokhorov, Irina Pavlova, and a lot of people put time into that place and got it up. And it's been amazing to see. So I would say that. And, anytime there's a playoff atmosphere in Barclays or Madison Square Garden, it's just an unparalleled experience for me to cover now.
So being in the area for so long, what neighborhood did you grow up in?
Oh, I was a Cobble Hill guy.
Oh, okay. So practically neighbors, man. I'm surprised we never met. All right. So what was that sensation, growing up with a Brooklyn team, obviously having that Knicks fandom early on? Like, what was that feeling like? Did you ever feel like a dual allegiance? Like, how do you interpret that? Like, what was that feeling? I mean, by that point, you're more media-based, but talk us through some of those emotions.
Well, that made it easier because I didn't, you put yourself out of it completely as a fan at that point. But I thought it was great. I thought it was great for the entire New York area. I think it's better when you have two teams. And, when the Knicks and Nets were both good and they were really going at it, this was a while ago. You're talking about like the Knicks having Carmelo and Amari and, the Nets.
And J. Kidd.
But you know what? That wasn't a rivalry then. The Nets smoked them. I think when the Knicks had those guys and the Nets had Gerald Wallace and whatnot and Jerry Stackhouse, I remember used to say before games that they had a little extra mustard on it. Those were the best. I love that inner city rivalry and for bragging rights. And when both teams are good, I think it's just better for the NBA overall.
Nah, I definitely feel that. Do you remember one of your first games covering both teams? Like what was that like the first time covering the Knicks? Like for example, since that was your team, like how surreal was that? What was that? Did you ever have those moments like getting nervous? Like this is the team I grew up watching. Now I'm covering it.
No, because once I went into media, I knew that the fandom side of it was gone and.
That jersey already got retired, basically.
Yeah, but what was cool about that, I remember that game was against the Phoenix Suns. I forget what year it was, but I actually got to talk to Steve Nash like after the game, and I told him the truth. I didn't know where I was going and whatnot, and he let me talk to him for a little, and I just thought that was so cool of him. Probably because I was a younger guy. If I was older in the game, he would have been like, "Nah, get out of here." But we walked like towards out of the locker room and whatnot, and we had a good conversation about. I think at the time he was at the end of his time with the Suns and what he was looking for out of the rest of his career, and I remember that when I think about Brooklyn, I mean, the thing that sticks out with the Brooklyn chants and just those conversations with guys like Jerry Stackhouse. Like Jerry Stackhouse was one of my favorite guys to talk to. What a character in every sense of the word. Those and then also another one was Kevin Garnett. One time, I spoke to him once before a game, which that never happens, and I just went up to him and we were talking about Minnesota because I have family that lives in Cottage Grove. And we just were talking about that. And for a few minutes, we talked about that. And he just told me he always enjoyed talking about Minnesota. That was always home for him. And then he had to go get ready. But that's more time than anybody got out of Kevin Garnett before a game, I think, ever. That guy never was in the locker room. It was such a by chance moment. And that was pretty cool because obviously I grew up watching KG in Minnesota.
Okay. And of those players, have you stayed in touch? Because it reminds me of when we talked to Alex Kennedy, who obviously had this early connection being a young writer and then, staying in touch with those guys. I believe it was Steve Francis back in with the Orlando Magic. So, like, with talking to Steve Nash and stuff, have you interviewed him more recently, kept in touch in those kind of stories?
No, those were, like, at the time, I just had, gone up to those guys. But people I've developed relationships with since in the league that have retired, absolutely kept in touch with. I would say the most fun I ever had during an interview was spoke to Tracy McGrady once one-on-one, and that was really fun. I think he was with, I don't think it was Detroit. It might have been with the Hawks when he was with the Hawks for like a year, or something like that. It was so long ago, but that was cool to me because I grew up playing NBA Live, and Tracy McGrady was on that cover, and I thought that was really cool to get a chance to talk with him, and I was impressed with, for a guy that never went to college. He was a very articulate guy, and then that really stuck out to me.
Gotcha. And then jumping back to the Nets, do you remember the first game you covered for them when they first moved to Brooklyn? And what stood out to you about
Just
that whole new vibe, that new branding, marketing, the players?
Just the full house, the Brooklyn chants, and that area was abandoned rail yards for so long, and it was crazy to be standing there and, in an arena, packed house for a basketball game at the highest level. That's what stood out to me.
Yeah. And then of some of the players that you've met and spoken to, who would surprise you to give you like a different image? Like they're kind of different from the guy on the court, like say they're bulldog mentality. And then when you talk in the locker room, they're like the guy you're going to grab a beer with kind of thing. Like who are some of those kind of players that you met during your time covering the league? You never expect to be that guy.
I would say Carmelo Anthony was the guy that here and there you would just talk to him about like Red Hook and the powerhouse, and I thought for a guy that was a superstar athlete, he was pretty down to earth. I didn't necessarily anticipate that. I didn't know of him being a superstar, and we see other superstars in the league. They are kind of distant and standoffish to some extent with reporters, but he was pretty cool to talk to and to open up with during that time. So that would be my answer for that question.
Okay, and since you brought up Melo, how are you feeling right now, seeing him back in the league right now with the Blazers, and that chance after
It's terrific. I mean, it's where he should be. I think anybody that's watched Carmelo knows he's an offensive talent still, and when put in a certain situation, he can thrive. I think for him, Portland was the perfect situation for him to play. And I think I'm just happy that he got a chance to come back and play, because for some other people like, Allen Iverson, I felt like it didn't end maybe the way it should have necessarily. I don't know if people did as much of the farewell tours as you see now with a lot of guys. So, for him, I think it's cool. I think people are more appreciative of what he's done in the league.
Yeah, and one more question before we move on to the next one. What kind of advice would you give to younger journalists, like thinking to your younger self, or just anyone you can think of? What kind of advice would you give them?
I would say that anytime you go to a game, maximize it. Like, try to go up and meet new people and be the best representation of yourself that you can be. Like, I used to go to games and I used to go in a suit, and I mean, I still do, but as a younger guy, and I try to carry myself like a pro, and I still do that every day. And I think that's the thing. People will respect you enough that if you show them who you are and what you're trying to do, and you're honest about things, that'll go a long way. And
you sound like another writer who covers the Nets who also wears great suits.
Well, I was doing it before him. No offense.
We know.
But yeah, no. I mean, I think the biggest thing too is it's such a hustle, and you need to have patience. I think if you don't work in the New York market, it could be easier because there's less people. But in New York, it is such a behemoth. There's so many media people trying to get stories and things like that, and it's very competitive. But you got to have patience. You have to have diligence and a mental fortitude. It's not easy in the business, and we see it every day that. Or every couple of months, a lot of talented people in this business lose jobs. and it's not an indictment on their work. It's just the situation within the business. A lot more companies are trying to do more with less, and it's been tough to see from when I first came in to where it is now. It's almost you're just scrapping to survive as best you can in an ever-changing business that constantly is shifting.
Exactly. And then you kind of just hinted at and led into it, a perfect transition right there. I was going to ask you, where do you think the field of sports journalism is heading? Obviously, it's just been changed so much over the past decade or so with the impact of what social media has made on sports journalism. Online media sites such as Nets Daily and others taking in and kind of taking away the spotlight from a lot of newspaper writers. So in your opinion, kind of where do you see the field of sports journalism heading, as you kind of just relayed that?
I think that there are more voices than ever that you can find through social media. I think social media definitely helped me grow, in terms of like tweeting out breaking news and things like that. And, certain stories I wrote, it definitely, one tweet can go across the world, and that is really cool. I do think sometimes there's different niches for people. Like some people will tweet out a lot of jokes. Some people tweet out videos. Some people will have hot takes. Some people will tweet like strictly news. I think you need to try to find where you fit in that. And I think that sometimes, when it comes to like engagement, I definitely used to tweet back at people a lot more when I was younger, but then I got away from that because I feel like as a journalist, it can do more harm than good sometimes, and it's not worth it. I would say that the other thing about, the business in general and being a guy on Twitter, I'm always careful about what I say and I think about it, because the second you put something out, it's there, and you can always try to delete something later, but it gets aggregated and things like that. You just have to be responsible as best you can.
Well, yeah, no, I really appreciate kind of the fan interaction with media. It's brought to new lights, like media are kind of like the players where they're idolized. You see people like myself, for example, that's how I kind of met you guys. Like, we fawn over you guys. You guys are like I said, we just idolize you guys for all the work that you put into, and you just stand to people. So sure that you're more than just a name on an article, that like you're a genuine person. And to me, that really brings life to what you write and to what you cover, and it just means a lot to us.
Oh, for sure. Well, first of all, I appreciate that. Second of all, I'm sure knowing me, you read my material a certain way and could probably put my accent on it and know where I'm coming from.
Oh, I do, man. I do.
Yeah, exactly. Mike, if you don't even remember, but when I met you at the NBA 2K19 event, you told me that exact advice with social media, kind of just how to control the social media account and how to really kind of find success in it. So that really, I remembered that. So that's the second time I heard it from you. So just want to throw that in there as well. And then, so the next question I kind of got for you was, who were some of your favorite athletes? I'll put you on the spot for this one. It's not too much pressure, but who were some of your favorite athletes to interview, and and any sports really that you were able to cover, and any one athlete that you were able to even talk to?
I think for me, Tracy McGrady was one, and Patrick Ewing. Those would be the two guys that stand out to me, just because T-Mac, is a guy that's been one of the greatest players at certain points of his career. He was so dominant, and Patrick Ewing, pretty much the reason why I like basketball in the first place. So it was really cool to chat with those guys.
That's good. And then obviously I talked about this with a couple other media members that hopped on the pod earlier in the earlier episodes. But Philip Bondi, Stephen Bondi's father, he told me that there's three types of players when it comes to media. So there's going to be players that like the media. There's going to be players that understand media as a business. And the third type of players are players that just completely hate the media in general. So can you just talk about, obviously, from your tenure as a sports reporter and a writer, kind of why do you think the media has been portrayed the image that they are, more of along the lines of athletes not having that good of a relationship with the media anymore? And why do you think that is?
Sure. I think that certain people – here's the thing about the whole media thing. What I try to do with certain players is have my relationship with those guys, whether it's a player, a coach, an executive, whoever. My relationship with you is how we interact, and that's separate from the quote-unquote media. I think because you know what happens is I think one guy could burn a player for whatever newspaper in whatever city or write a certain headline, and that player takes it the wrong way, and they go, the media, and then they generalize it. That, I think, is a mistake. There's other players that, have certain guys that they trust. And I think that that's fine. You build that over time, especially if you see guys more often and whatnot. And my personal philosophy is if I tell a player, like, even if it's as simple as, like, listen, I'm going to ask you X amount of questions. And I'm like, that's it. I'm not lying to you. And then I do it, and I was like, told you, thank you. And they're like, I kept your word, I got you. And that's it. Stuff like that. And if you're talking, make it clear whether you're on or off the record. I think that's extremely important. So that way there's no disparity of any kind. Just be a straight shooter. I think that's the way it should be in life, let alone in this job. And as far as like how the media is viewed, there is certain sites do different things. Certain people do write clickbait stuff, and it's blatantly obvious. And other people don't. Other people try to write really good stories, and you as a consumer have to go through that and dissect what is best for you and your taste.
Exactly. You just hit it right there on the nail, and I can't agree more with you just on everything you just said, because at least from my personal experiences, I know the best interviews that I've done were interviews that were straight shooting questions. Just tell them, hey, I have this many questions to ask. And obviously the interviews depend on the scenario, if it's a media scrum at the end of the game, or if it's at an event, or if it's just a one-on-one, whatever the comparison is. But I agree with you 100%, just how everything, the best type of interviews are you just tell them ahead of time, hey, I got this X amount of questions to ask, whatever the case is, and you ask, you be honest with them. The tone you give off to, be conversational. So yeah, I agree with that completely. And then similar question as well in regard to your reporting. What has been some of your favorite news to break, which has also been known as the Scotto Splash?
I would say the first trade I ever broke, the Tobias Harris trade, will always stick out to me, because that day I probably went up about 4,000 followers, and I got a lot of shout outs from a lot of the big names in this business that I respect. When people started a lot of people started taking me more seriously. And I would say, I forget what draft it was, but when I broke some draft picks, that was huge for me. I remember getting that same rush and whatnot, and a couple of free agency signings here and there, and then over the past summer, like putting out more specific terms on contracts and details and things like that. I mean, it's just been a continuous build-up, and I think the more, obviously, the more you get right, the more you build up your credibility, and it's always better to be right, and that's the biggest thing, But when I think of the biggest things I've broken, definitely Tobias' trade when he went to Detroit from Orlando, and that really stuck out to me. And the draft picks,
just say it was magical.
Well done, Doug.
And then, Mike, I got to ask you, too, when it comes to news breaking, A common thing for a lot of guys is obviously to be called out on their reports as inaccurate, false, especially in recent days with the power of social media.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to ask you kind of, how do you know, do you take the typical step of, okay, if I get this big news and know it's not any rumors are going around on it or on the topic of it, you pass it on through a couple sources? How do you kind of approach it? How do you know what news is trustworthy and what's not, how to put it out? Or is it all just kind of just off that kind of what you believe? Like if you say, hey, you know what, I think this is accurate, I'm going to put it out.
Well, I think that first of all, anybody if you're going to have sources, you got to build it up over time. It takes years. And I don't, just because, when I was younger, just because some people would tell me things, I didn't put it out. I'd either check with other people or I would listen and, to others and see if it was true. You definitely want to get as many sources as possible on something, more than one, obviously. And you want them to be as close to the situation as possible, whether it's the player themselves, an agent, an executive, someone who's around that, it could be another source. You never know that just has a unique position in whatever situation you're dealing with. But it's definitely a challenge because you want to be first, but you got to be right. And I think that's the biggest thing, obviously. And, you would say like, well, sometimes like, are there instances where you would put something out if it's one person? You may, but you have to have such implicit trust in somebody, and I will say this, the people that I've become close with in this business, there are a very few select people who have been so accurate, and this is a very small handful, who have been accurate on anything and everything that they have ever told me, and are such trusted confidants that I always joke with them, that if my wife was pregnant and the doctor said that we were going to have a girl, but that person told me that we were going to have a boy, I would have to reconsider and see if I get another opinion.
Wow, that's crazy, man.
But you have to get to a level where you're on the money 100% of the time. It can't be 95. It's got to be 100. And again, there are very few select people that are like that. And just over time, it's like a snowball effect. The more you break, the more people are going to talk to you. It's easier. It's a lot easier for me to go up to a person I may not have met before now than it was 9 seasons ago when I started. When I first started 9 seasons ago, people didn't know who I was. How are you going to get trust? Now you go up to somebody and you say, I'm Michael Scotto from Bleacher Report or whatnot, and they're like, it's nice to meet you. I've read your stuff. It's like, thank you. I appreciate that. Took X amount of years, but here we are. And that's the biggest thing is you have to, one, have the cojones to go up to somebody and introduce yourself, and two, just because you go up to somebody, you may or may not get someone. They may tell you like, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that, and okay, fine, that's fine. Be a straight shooter with me, and then those walls will get broken down over time. It's a delicate balance.
No, of course, man. Well, thank you for sharing that. So we're gonna go into our final main segment and talk about the NBA today.
Yeah, so obviously this ideology has died out over the past couple of weeks, but obviously load management's been a big debate in the NBA, if it does exist, obviously. When it comes to older players, their thought process behind it is there's no such thing as load management. You get paid to play 82 games in a season. So, Mike, I just wanted to get your opinion on load management and kind of how it's impacted the NBA today. And do you think that what do you think the future is of load management in the league?
I think I want to say this. I think there's a difference between load management and injury management. If a guy's coming off an injury like a knee surgery and you don't want to play him on back-to-backs for X amount of games into the season, I think that is injury related and it makes sense. Load management is hard to prove. I think the problem with load management for people is if they take their kid to a game and their favorite player isn't playing and they think he's just taking a night off, that's unacceptable to people. and fans and consumers. And I get that side of it. But I just think there's a difference between load management and injury management for these guys. And a real competitor will always want to be out there. I don't, that's what separates the great players. So a guy like Giannis Antetokounmpo wants to be out there every night. And that's the kind of guy you want leading your organization. And I think behind the scenes that plays as much a role for an organization as it does for a fan coming to the game.
Exactly. And then I got to talk to you as well about kind of early solutions in your what you think are some early solutions when it comes to load management. You think obviously people date back to when their kids played in AAU ball, and that if they played one sport, it resulted in having more injuries. And obviously more stuff comes out day by day. It gets hotter and hotter. But kind of what's your opinions on any types of solutions? Limit the NBA season, cut down a couple games, fine teams for sending out players, and potentially, what do you think of it?
Well, they've clearly tried to limit the back-to-backs and change the schedule. I think just sometimes injuries happen. I think we got to get over this whole thing of, we want to prevent everything. If we all this sports science, nutrition. Well, guess what? If you twist your ankle, you twist your ankle. That's a free thing that happens, and your feet get tangled up in the lane. There's nothing you can do about that. Or if you land awkwardly, I just think like stuff happens, and it's a part of the game. You got to deal with it. That's just the best way I could say it.
Exactly, I agree with that. And then, Doug, you want to get right into the next topic?
Yeah, let's get into the thicker things. Let's continue with the present. How about them Nets? I mean, what are you feeling right now? After looking at the summer, let's bring it back to the summer.
Yeah,
talk about how they started, where they are now. What do you expect to happen by, let's say, February, and then all the way by April?
Okay, I thought coming into the year they'd win 45, 47 games, somewhere in that range. Kyrie came in. I think guys were a little starstruck, and it was a lot of isolation ball. I know he had like decent assists, over 7 assists, but it just seemed like the best solution was to clear it out and let him do his thing. Now, I think it's going to be different when he comes back, whenever that is, after watching all these guys play well cohesively. When Kyrie was playing, the Nets were bottom 10 in terms of passes. The year before, they were top 10 in passes. So it's been a different offense at that time, and I think that's going to level out a little bit more. Spencer Dinwiddie has put himself in the mix for, once he goes back to being the sixth man of the year award, and is a guy that I think in any other year would get all-star consideration. It's going to be tough. I mean, I think he'll get like some consideration, but I don't know right now if he ultimately gets in. I think there's a lot of good players, and I think for the Nets, the only way they can get a guy like him in is if they got a top 4 record in the East, and that's going to take some time. Looking ahead, the biggest storyline to me is if Kyrie can change the narrative of him as a leader, as the focal point with Durant out, most likely all of this year, and how far he can take that team. It can get them into the playoffs, past the first round, and how do they look on the court together? You have to understand, Sean Marks has to make a lot of big decisions looking towards next season when Durant is back, because at that point, whether they want to say it or not, you're in title contention at that point, whether you want those expectations or not. I mean, I know that they do on one hand, but the Nets do try to downplay some things sometimes, whether it's injuries or whatnot, and not putting, Kenny Atkinson will never put a number of wins that he thinks the team can get. They always try to reserve judgment. But when Durant comes back, it's go time for a title. And for them, it doesn't matter how rusty he's going to be coming back. You need to see which of these guys around Kyrie now can be a part of that championship core.
No, definitely, man. They already made a big decision with Shump getting cut, and then finally getting some Wilson. sorry with my enthusiasm, was a little shot from his debut. But like, what kind of things do you think they'll make any trades by February? And when do you think Karras and Kyrie come back? Do you think this decade, or do you think into 2020?
I think I could see both back by 2020. But actually, you know what? It's harder with Kyrie. It really is, because this injury has taken such a different course than when it first happened. Like, Kenny didn't think it was going to be that long of an injury. You know, with the Nets, it's so hard to predict injuries. One, because they don't really give many updates, other than, at least in the press release, they'll say like non-contact or whatnot. But it's hard to penetrate that side of it when guys can come back.
Definitely.
I just think that when they come back, it's also going to be interesting too, because if you're LeVert, it's a different game for him when Kyrie and Dinwiddie are the ball handlers. He's at his best when he's at a high pick and roll. What's going to happen then? They're going to have some major adjustments and questions to figure out as a cohesive unit.
It's great you brought that up, because when we had Matt Brooks on, we were talking about what's the lineup going to be when at least Kyrie's back. Do you, because of Dinwiddie's success, do you start him? Do you keep him on the bench, bring Karras with him because they have good dynamics together, and keep Temple at the 2? Like, what are you feeling as of now? What could be the lineup when they're both back?
I think Spencer's at his best when the ball's in his hand. So if he's coming off the bench replacing Kyrie, I think that's optimal. That's just my sense. In terms of Karras, I think he's a starter, and him with Temple works because of their defense. Kyrie is not the best defender, so I think he balances them out. So that's just my thought process on both sides of the ball.
So if, let's say, you start Karras, you start Temple, how does that help? How does it work with the Joe and Prince dynamic, do you think?
Well, you're keeping Prince at the 4. I think that, Joe would start.
To balance out the offense.
Yeah, and I think Temple comes off the bench with Dinwiddie. Because one thing about Dinwiddie, he can drive and kick, and you want at least one knockdown shooter. Joe and Kyrie click, dating back from their time in Cleveland together. So I definitely think that you're going to see different mixing and matching and whatnot. But just to start the game out, Joe's shooting and consistent shooting balances them out a little bit better. I think Temple's defense with Dinwiddie works, and the way Spencer drives, Temple can hit the wing 3 or the corner 3 effectively. So he'll benefit from those type of shots. Joe can get open at any time and whatnot.
Definitely. So I got 2 more questions about the Nets before we head on to the other team. So one is about the growth of Jared Allen, and what do you think, like, so different, because he had a slow start, and since that slow start, he's been on another level. Like, Fear the Fro is just more than a fun thing we chant.
He's a different person. He's more open, and he's finally like kind of broken his shell. I think that's been the biggest thing for him. I look back to Summer League when I asked him about starting, and he cursed, and he was like, "Yeah, F it, I want to start." I never heard that guy curse in my life. I was almost like shell shocked, almost dropped my phone recording him. But it was good. It was good to see him take that ownership and want that for himself and that drive. He's become a more consistent rebounder, which has been the biggest knock on him in his early career. So, yeah, I think those are the biggest strides in his game today.
All right, cool. And then one of them is a 2-part question. With Durant, what was that feeling, when the announcement came out? I know you were pretty close to the site when the signings came out, getting that feel of things in the area. What did that feel like when you first officially heard it? I know it's a big jump back, but
it was a surreal moment because I knew that everything changed once Durant was coming and Kyrie. The Brooklyn Nets were going to be a team that had the spotlight on them again for the first time really since Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce were there. That one year where they were trying to go for the title with Kirilenko and those guys. And that, not since, I know they had Carmelo with the Knicks, but like the 2 of them together was better than when the Knicks had Amari and Carmelo when they first got them. It was that type of buzz and excitement when the news came out.
So do you think that kind of news will transition to not only a possibility of Durant return? Are you shutting him down for the season in your perspective right now? And even if he does return or does not return, where do you think the Nets will be in the playoffs? You don't have to see them. That's totally fine. Do you think they make it out of the first round?
I don't see Durant coming back right now. I think it's better for him to come back fully healthy next season and not try to rush it. And I think as far as the Nets, I mean, it really depends on the matchup. But I do think, I'll say this, based on the talent that they have, you would think they should get out of the first round. And if they don't, it needs to be a 6 or 7 game series. But I would expect them to play better if they're all clicking on all cylinders. I just believe from the addition of Kyrie, DeAndre, even Garrett Temple, like they're a better team on paper. Torian Prince, like on paper, they're better.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I'm hoping for at least a second round exit at minimum, but I really appreciate you giving me an insight on the Nets. So now it's time to talk about the other guys.
Yeah, Mike. So let's take it away. Let's go talk about the New York Knicks. So, like you did with the Nets, kind of just talk about the Knicks in general. Would you predict them ending out wins and losses? Did you expect the season to be as in a whirlwind as it is going on right now?
I thought the Knicks would go 20 to 25 wins this year. I don't know if they're going to hit that 25, that's for sure. I did not expect just the I'm trying to think of the right word.
It's like
it's been a little chaotic. I think chaotic is the word because when after that 10th game when Steve Mills and Scott Perry came out, saying that they just felt like they needed to talk, it was like red alert, and the whole league knew it. It was the talk of anyone who came to Madison Square Garden for the next week. Now it's like, all right, well, what did you realistically think this team was going to be? They're not sniffing the playoffs. I don't see it. I don't see like a Miami Heat type of comeback run like Wayne Ellington was talking about. I think what they need to be doing is figuring out what the future looks like for R.J. Barrett, Frank Ntilikina, Kevin Knox, Julius Randle, who's a part of that core. I would shop Marcus Morris hard. He's probably never going to play better than he is right now. And I do like Taj Gibson as a veteran role model for them, but I could see obviously them shopping him as well. Elfrid Payton. You have to.
Yeah, my next question actually led into it right there was, what players are on the trade block and what players are you going to keep if you're the New York Knicks?
Like I said, you gotta shop Marcus. You have to shop all the veterans. I mean,
yeah,
you have to. And as far as the only thing that matters to them is the development of R.J. Barrett, Mitchell Robinson, Kevin Knox, Ntilikina. That's the closest thing you have to a young core. So you better figure out what they're going to be long term for your franchise.
That's true. And then I got to ask you as well, since it's kind of been it's a quiet debate now, but I know a couple, especially in the offseason, was kind of a heated debate. Who's kind of the best young center in New York when it comes to Jared Allen or Mitchell Robinson?
I would say Jared Allen because he's produced on a more consistent basis and he doesn't have nearly the foul trouble that Mitchell Robinson does.
Okay, I agree with that. I actually wrote a story up on that a while back for Nets Daily. And kind of my final question with you for the Knicks, kind of is around their off season? What kind of should they look forward and look into kind of this off season? Obviously, the rumors have all been around Jason Kidd and Giannis. And so if you're the Knicks and if you're a Knicks fan, what are some realistic expectations you are looking for when summertime comes and free agency comes?
If you're a Knicks fan, you need to set your expectations lower because after the past few summers, I think that, some people would say whether it's the media thinking, putting out that Durant was coming or whatnot, Knicks fans got hopeful. I think at this point, they need structure. They need to figure out if they're going to go in a new direction with management. If so, who are you going after? And you better go after them with everything you have, because the only way, if they decide to go with new management, the only way it's going to work is if they tear everything down in terms of the current management structure. If they keep Steve Mills and Scott Perry in power, is Mike Miller your guy? Is he high profile enough? I don't know about that. I think they would look to get a splashier coach. And in terms of the roster and free agency and whatnot, this is a very weak free agent class. So I don't think it really matters one way or the other. You already got people talking about 2021 with Giannis, so that's the only free agent class that really matters. This isn't going to move the needle. And so for the Knicks, again, you have to hope that you develop the young guys, you get a high draft pick, and you hit a home run.
No, definitely. And one last fun thing with the Knicks. How did you feel when you heard RJ find out later, jokingly said that he retired because the Knicks were the only team interested in him? Like, what were your reaction to that?
That's just RJ taking making a joke of the Knicks. He's a TV analyst now. That's what he's got to do.
Broadcasting comedian.
He's good at what he does. I thought it was funny. I think some people took him obviously more seriously than it needed to be, but he got what he wanted out of it. He became a talking point.
Yeah, it was quite fun, man. So transitioning to our last big part of NBA today, what are some other teams that caught your eyes? And then who's coming out of the West, who's coming out of the East, and who is winning it all?
I think Toronto really stuck out to me in Dallas, because Dallas, I did not think they would be top four good in the West at this point. I still thought they would have some growing pains while Porzingis.
Funny you mentioned that, because tonight, the night we're recording, they just beat the Bucks. Porzingis played well, and they're surprised. And in the East, Toronto, because without Kawhi and Kyle Lowry was hurt at the beginning of the year, I think Fred VanVleet's put himself in a position for a nice payday this summer. And as far as teams that are going to win it out of the East, I still think the Bucks are the preeminent favorite. And in the West, I think the Lakers are the Clippers, and I'm going to lean towards the Clippers because of their depth and defense. Sounds good.
That's perfect. And then, well, it's getting a little late, but Mike, thanks again for joining us. We really appreciate you taking time out of your Monday night to talk to Doug and I. We really appreciate it.
You got it, fellas. It was my pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your night.
Yeah, thank you. So, okay, Chris, you want to give the closing remarks?
Yeah, so remember, guys, feel free to email over any suggestions, questions, comments, or thoughts to any of our content by sending an email to wingspanpodcast@gmail.com. And do not forget to follow us on our social media accounts on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to our podcast on your preferred listening service. And as for next time, stay classy and take care, guys.
Yay!